Good morning. It is Wednesday, July 15th, and we are gathering for our morning devotions. Welcome to everyone as they join. I am Heather E. Clausen, pastor of Bethel Lutheran Church and the United Methodist Church, both in Herman, Minnesota. This morning, we are going to be in the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, the book of 2 Samuel in chapter 6. I'm going to be sharing a story that has always fascinated me. And hopefully today, as we look at this, we can hear a call to joy. The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel come along following the book of Kings. Before that time, the Hebrew people were a tribal nation, each individual tribe, each individual grouping of people, the 12 tribes of Israel. And Scripture tells us everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes. Under the tribal authority, that was fine. But what had happened and why they ended up asking God for a king was that without any central authority, without any leadership that all could turn to, each of the tribes became very vulnerable to enemies. And so began the change in the history where they would have central leadership. And of course, as the story unfolds, the times it went well, and like in our modern day, the times it doesn't go well. And as 1 Samuel begins, it is Saul who becomes king. And initially, Saul is a very good king. But that does change. And what we see when we read through that is really a descent into madness, resulting at the end of 1 Samuel with Saul committing suicide, no longer able to deal whether it's with the voices or with the failures that he continued to have. Before this was the call of David. Now David was of a family, the 8th son, not remarkable, he was a shepherd. But he was the one chosen by God to be anointed. And as our story begins after the death of Saul in 2 Samuel, we begin to see this rise of David as the king. And by the end of 2 Samuel, he has now risen to be a powerful king, a king that also has enlarged the territory, but also has brought a period of peace to people that have lived constantly in a state of conflict because of enemies around them. But in our part of the story, reclaiming their historical faith, their symbols of faith, has fallen to David. And the Ark of the Covenant has in many ways been in storage to keep it safe. And as the fortunes of Israel change, David seeks to bring that back. And the Ark of the Covenant to the Hebrew people, to the Israelites, was to them the symbol of God's presence. Where the ark was, God was present. So we turn this morning to chapter 6. It was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obededom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. As the ark came into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. What a change in emotion in that passage. Could you imagine that parade as they came in? People were overjoyed. They were excited. And it was good for them to have something to celebrate because their lives had been hard and had been difficult. But there were those who saw that celebration, that joy, that enjoyment of that moment as something to be judged and that was scandalous. What David was doing was celebrating before God and being joyful. And in that moment, as he celebrated, as the Ark of the Covenant came back, the people were lifted up with him. The people were able to let go, even for that moment, the burdens that they all carried, the uncertainties. And David brought them to that, both by the returning of the Ark of the Covenant, the reminder that God was with them. Of course, God always had been. But it was also to give them permission to practice joy. When, as Michal responded, we lose that balance of trouble, that balance of things that overwhelm us, when we lose that balance with joy and pleasure in life, we really close ourselves off to God and to others. As the story unfolds, the life of Michal would not be a happy one. She had chosen not to have joy, but instead to live in judgment. You know, it is joy and happiness are something we actually have to practice, because there's no question that we are in some overwhelming circumstances. Here in Herman, with the outbreak of COVID, to be safe and caring for one another, and to be concerned about those we know in our community that are vulnerable. To see our country torn apart because people cannot speak to one another without arguing, and lose sight of the best good for all people. This story of David, I love it. I love that joy. I can just see it in my mind as they're coming into the community. And he had stripped down to just the most minimal covering to dance, to be fully present to God, and to dance to the Lord. It makes me think of a movie, Footloose. When the community, because of an incident, a car accident where lives were lost, began to shut down from joy, began to become more judgmental, more restricting, even to the point of books. And they were not going to allow a prom, from the belief that dancing and stuff was the work of the devil. Well, they were afraid. And they thought if they could control things, they would never have to experience what they'd experienced before. And if you've seen the movie, you know that the main character brings these exact verses to the city council. verses from the Bible that said that David danced. This morning I want to share with you a poem, an ancient poem, from Teresa of Avila. And all of Teresa of Avila's poetry, everything she wrote, was about God. And for her, the presence of God was just as natural as the air that she would breathe. So this morning I want to share this short poem and then invite you into a practice today. So this is the poem. What a burden I thought I was to carry, a crucifix, as did he. Love once said to me, I know a song, would you like to hear it? And laughter came from every brick in the street and from every pore in the sky. After a night of prayer, he changed my life when he sang, Enjoy me. Well, you know, in times like these, many of us do carry heavy burdens. And we carry those burdens into our prayer, into our practice of contemplation. And sometimes it feels as if St. John of the Cross spoke of this dark night of the soul. I think we can find healing by soaking up things like this poem, where the laughter came out of the street and came out of every pore. And all the message God had for her was, enjoy me. So what if, in these difficult realities we face, and we're not denying them at all, we seek to find the good, the true, and the beautiful, even in the midst of sorrow and suffering. So this is the invitation to set aside at least 5 minutes today, and unfolding every day, not just today, but to think of something that brings you joy. It might be a favorite memory, a faithful companion, a beloved child, the sunrise, the stars at night. It could be something as simple as your favorite type of ice cream. Think of something that brings you joy and then hold that thought. Smile. Hold that smile. Imagine God, the divine, saying to you in that moment, enjoy me. From the poem of Teresa of Avila. And then gently hold that enjoyment as well. And if your thoughts start to wander, come back to that image of joy. Smile again and again and hear the divine, enjoy me. 5 minutes. Think of something that brings you joy. Hold that. Let the smile form that will come as you think of joy. And then hold that. And then allow God to speak into that moment of joy with a message that says, enjoy me. And you can repeat the cycle as often as you want, thinking of another thing that brings you joy and then another thing that brings you joy. We do carry a lot in our lives. And sometimes, like Mikhail in our story, we can allow that to make us bitter and angry and sad. So we need that balance. We need, I don't know, if I drive around and see you dancing in your yard, that'd be wonderful. But David brought that joy back to the people. And he was not calculatedly doing that. He was celebrating with joy God's presence. in God's goodness to the people. So try this practice. What you may find is that you're just lifted up a little bit. And you may find, even as you deal with the realities of everyday life, that you're going to find yourself looking for joy as well. Go in peace. Amen.